Welcome to everyone. My name is Wendy Wolford. I am a faculty member at Cornell University and also the Vice Provost for International Affairs. Welcome, both panelists and the participants. This is the sixth in our series of global salons. We're having salons or intimate conversations on critical topics this semester. Over the past 3 months, we've had a fantastic set of cross-disciplinary, cross-regional perspectives on topics including future cities, democratic challenges and change, inequality and social justice, migrations and mobilities, and big data, AI, and new media. You can see that all of these are very big topics and require really a disciplinary reach to be able to talk about properly. The videos for all of those past salons are available on the Einaudi Center website, and we're really excited today to be having this conversation on an incredibly important topic, a very relevant one, of One Health. The participants in this conversation are from Cornell's Global Hub partner universities around the world. The Global Hubs, you can find out more about these on the website as well. They're partnerships with peer universities that are intended to deepen connections and build educational, research, and engagement opportunities through really an exchange, a mutually beneficial exchange, in order to help us all address what we think are some of the most challenging and also the most important questions in front of us. So thank you to everyone for joining and for participating, and thank you to Rachel Riedel and the Einaudi team for organizing and hosting these salons. I'll turn it over to Rachel, who is the John S. Knight Professor and Director of the Mario Einaudi Center for International Studies.
Thank you so much, Wendy, and thanks to all of our panelists for being here, our experts to help us start this conversation, and thanks to all of our audience members for listening in today. One Health is certainly the topic of our moment, of our global moment, and it's an approach that recognizes that the health of people is closely connected to the health of animals and our shared environment. It's a collaborative and multi-sectoral and transdisciplinary approach at its very conception, and it's working at the local, regional, national, and global levels with the goal of achieving optimal health outcomes and recognizing the intersections between animals, people, plants, and our ecosystems that we share together. So I think with that, it's really indicative of the necessity to pull together our global teams and work with our partners across our Global Hub universities. And we're so honored to have their expertise with us here today. I want to invite our audience members as well to share your questions, your ideas, your reactions, your own research centers and projects that you're involved in the Q&A function. And we'll use those to further this conversation after we've gone through each of our panelists' introductions. In order to continue this conversation and allow the engagement of our audience, we'll use those questions as a springboard for the next step of potential collaborations as we launch this thematic topic today with all of our collaborators from across the globe. I want to be very brief so that we can move on to each of our experts, but I'm just going to briefly explain the charge that we've given to each of our panelists, which is to do 3 things today. The first is to introduce themselves, their research groups, the type of work that they're conducting. The second is to share information about the centers and groups, initiatives at their home universities that are related to this topic and ripe for collaboration opportunities. And the third is really blue sky thinking. It's an opportunity to share what they think is the future of this research agenda that can best be facilitated by this type of interdisciplinary multilateral research collaborations. So how can this conversation of leading scholars today meaningfully move us forward to take up next generation questions in the context of One Health? So with huge thanks to our experts who are joining us today, I'm going to start with Mickey Stewart from Cornell University.
Thank you very much. Let me share my slides here. So get to my button. There it is. Great. So I'm Mickey Stewart. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for International Affairs and Affiliations here at Weill Cornell Medical College. That's Cornell University's medical school, which is located in New York City. Here's a picture of New York City. And if you look down here on the lower right side, this is our campus in Manhattan, the medical school, our partner hospital. We're also across the street from Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and Rockefeller University, and we have affiliations with both of those. We also have a branch campus in Doha, Qatar, which we've had since 2001. I have the very difficult tab. I'm supposed to talk about what sort of research is happening at my institution. Well, I represent 2,000 faculty, MD, PhD, master's students. We have 26 academic departments, about 15 institutes, including stem cell, precision medicine, metabolic health, et cetera. We also have multiple clinical centers, cancer center, a spine center, an autism center, just to list a few. So we are a large medical school with a lot of potential opportunities. I will tell you, we do have an international affairs office that I direct, and we oversee multiple international affiliations, many of them. I'll tell you, our four largest are, we have an HIV and tuberculosis research and clinical care center in Haiti, which has been Port-au-Prince, which has been there actually for many years. We actually have NIH-funded research, which happens there. That's called GESCIO, which is an acronym for some French words. We do regular education in Salzburg, Austria. That is for doctors who are already in practice. That is led by many different Cornell departments. We have our medical school in Qatar, and we have an office of international medical student education. About half of Cornell's graduating medical students have done an international rotation at some point in their career. We do a lot of research collaborations. We have a lot of clinical collaborations. And I would say our big picture questions would be obviously potential specific research type questions, but comparative healthcare systems, the way we deliver healthcare and the way that it is organized, private, public, government, not-for-profit, et cetera. That's a very big topic of interest for us. And also obviously basic and clinical research. And I'll come back to medical student education and exchanges along with faculty exchanges are also things that we're very interested in. So in the interest of time, I'll stop there. There's one more picture of our campus in New York City, and I will stop sharing and I look forward to the other presentations.
Thank you so much, Mickey. That's a great way to start us off. Next, we'll move to Dr. Gabriel Truba from the University of San Francisco de Quito.
Let me see what.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for inviting me. So, I am part of a small institution in Ecuador, which is the Instituto de Microbiología at the Universidad San Francisco de Quito. We have a research center that has like 25 scientists that work in different fields of the microbiology. And the work that I decided to present today is basically the transmission of high impact antimicrobial resistant genes between food animals and humans. And we do this in the rural communities of Ecuador. We also have another research project in the Amazonia ecosystems. We are looking at the degradation of the ecosystems and the relationship with the prevalence of some zoonotic pathogens in wild mice and bats. And the detection of tropical febrile diseases in remote northern coastal communities. Here we look at vector-borne diseases and zoonotic diseases. So to talk about the first project, very briefly, we studied mainly the transmission of this beta-lactamase gene, CTXN, between E. coli, and we look at the isolates from humans and domestic animals, and then we were able to describe some transmission of this E. coli. We know that some of this E. coli can be transmitted between domestic animals and humans, and probably from humans to domestic animals. We're also looking right now at the plasmid transmission of these genes and how the plasmid and clonal transmission relate to each other, and which one is more important. It's more important, or whether both of them are equally important. Recently, we found that well, other people have described this, and we just confirmed that the wastewater from cities that don't have these water treatment plants is a huge source of antibiotic-resistant genes. So we're finding that these antibiotic-resistant genes in pastures, we are finding in vegetables that they go back to the market. So it's a full cycle of transmission. What we are trying to do in the future, and that will be probably something that we will be interested in doing some kind of a collaboration, is understanding the bacterial fitness costs of carrying these antibiotic-resistant genes. What happened in the environment? You know, what's the problem that we have in the environment with these plasmids? Also, we would like to understand how these genes are disseminated to environmental bacteria. That's another concern that we have. We're finding that some environmental bacteria are, you know, getting these genes. I forgot to mention that these BLAST CTX genes cause extended spectrum resistance to beta lactamases, so which is a really a big problem in hospitals. The other project that we have is this about the ecosystem degradation and the prevalence of zoonotic pathogens in mice and bats. In South America, we have a very serious hemorrhagic fevers that are carried by mice, and as you probably know, the mice and the bats are very highly diverse, probably the most diverse mammals. So they tend to carry a large variety of viruses, and some of them are dangerous, as probably you realize with the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. So we are planning to use metagenomic approaches to detect the pathogens that carry these animals. And also, I would like to mention that we have a center in a region that is pristine in the Amazon, in the Yasuni National Park. We are using that as a base. We have started to do some pilot study, but we are also looking for some partnership to carry out this work. And finally, we have this other project. We work in rural communities, very remote communities in the northern part of Ecuador, in the province of Esmeraldas. We have two groups of people there. We have the Afro-Ecuadorian people and also an indigenous group. And we study, you know, many problems with the environment and how the transmission of the vector-borne diseases are associated to that. And also, we started to look at some zoonotic diseases that are probably also causing these febrile diseases in these regions. And we are using metagenomic approaches, trying to use this way to discriminate what type of pathogen is causing the fever, the febrile disease. And we found that there is a large variety of viruses that are entering this region, and we also have malaria. We have leptospirosis, so many diseases that cause fever, and which are difficult to diagnose. So I will stop here. If you have any questions, I don't know whether there will be a space for questions afterwards.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Truba. There will be space for questions at the end, and we encourage all of the audience to continue to put questions in Q&A throughout so that I can gather them for all of our panelists at the end. Thank you so much. Next, we will move to Dr. Yiking Tayo from National University of Singapore.
Thank you very much. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the audience. My background, I'm a statistical geneticist. I focus on the use of analytics, data, evidence for the design of policies and programs, and actually in monitoring and evaluation as well. But more specific to today's theme, because I'm a geneticist, a statistical geneticist, actually I work in the area of One Health through the use of pathogen surveillance, both through genomics and hospital laboratory testing, including, I think, what the previous speaker talked about, the metagenomic approach of sequencing bacteria. But we do this in humans, livestock, and even the environment, such as the water and the soil, to truly understand some of the extent and drivers of antimicrobial resistance in a One Health context. Now, in my School of Public Health at the National University of Singapore, there is a Center for Health Intervention and Policy Evaluation Research that performs policy analysis, as well as the translation of research evidence to policies and programs. And at the same time, my school has been very privileged to host a Southeast Asian network on antimicrobial resistance that is jointly funded by the UK Wellcome Trust and by Singapore. Now, in response to the thought experiment that was set as a challenge, I thought the future agenda could really be focusing on the role of academics in public health and clinical healthcare beyond the academic pursuits of research findings, grants, and publications. So my thesis here is really how, as academics, what is our social responsibility in terms of how our work, our research actually impacts and benefits society. So this has been a challenge to many of our peers in public health and clinical medicine, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, when we start to review what were the roles that we were playing, whether we were working with our regional, national governments on designing appropriate measures to try and improve infection control, to minimize infection, or whether we were even working with traditional social media to communicate the appropriate actions that individuals, communities, or government agencies ought to be taking. And one challenge to all of us, especially on the panel, is that whether we are actively reaching out to address some of the misinformation or disinformation that was very prevalent during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, really thinking about our roles as academic in global public health, not just during pandemics, but during times of local or global crisis, to which the theme of One Health definitely will include the problem of antimicrobial resistance, as well as some of the challenges that will be brought about by climate change. But I'll stop there. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. Wonderful questions. And they actually tie into the last salon that we just had on big data, AI, and new media, and really the intersection that you raise of science, expertise, and the information to the public. So thank you for raising those. Next, we'll move to Dr. Elaine Flores at Imperial College London.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elaine Flores. I'm an Imperial College Research Fellow at the National Heart and Lung Institute. When trying to think of how to describe my research, I started writing down some words, and I thought I would just share my word cloud with you to start things off. So at core, I'm an environmental epidemiologist. I use data and statistical analyses to try and understand how environmental factors can influence health throughout the life course. I'm particularly interested in the effect of vegetation exposure, such as pollen, or even just living nearby agricultural forests, and how this can interact with pollution and other factors, such as behavioral factors or genetics, to influence health development. My focus and that of my group, given the Institute, lies largely with respiratory health, focusing on allergy, respiratory health outcomes, and asthma. And the way that we do this is that we capitalize on big international cohorts, both within Europe, but also internationally, as well as routinely collected medical data, such as asthma hospitalizations. So this is all a very broad picture, and I wanted to give sort of one example of the types of analyses that we run here. For example, I'm largely interested in looking at how vegetation around individuals' home can influence the development of their health throughout life. So using, for example, satellite imagery, such as I've created here for a map of Paris, we can assess really the types and the amount of vegetation around any given address, such as an individual's home, and then link that through their health as they age, linking to pregnancy outcomes, child development, things like better mental health, increased physical activity, and also morbidity and mortality into older age. And we're not just interested in looking at associations, but we also want to understand the mechanisms that these underlying associations are run through so that we can target appropriate changes both in treatment, but also policy and societal. For example, thinking of respiratory health and how vegetation might play a role. I mean, it might be going through physical activity, it might be changing the way a child interacts with their environment, such as farming exposures to lead to the development of their immune system. Obviously, vegetated areas represent areas of lower air pollution, and these are all good. But it's also important to realize that being exposed to vegetation can represent pollen, which can exacerbate asthma and allergic disease among those who suffer from these conditions. So the key research questions that we're considering in my group right now in terms of vegetation is to try and understand how different vegetation exposures, as well as various bioaerosols that don't necessarily fall into this category, such as mold, can influence health. And we're interested in identifying how best to measure the health impacts of bioaerosols. For example, we're all, there is some extent limited monitoring of pollen, but there's actually no monitoring, regular monitoring that I'm aware of the actual amount of airborne allergen in the air, and that's what leads to the health outcome. And how these bioaerosols interact with air pollutants, not only in rural settings, but increasingly in urban centers where the majority of people live. And obviously there's this huge question about how ongoing and future climate change is going to affect these relationships. So I'd just like to conclude by highlighting that I'm part of the MRC Center for Environmental Health here in the UK, which is a massive partnership between 4 leading universities in London, where we do research under all of these themes, and we have cross-cutting information with cohorts, data resources, and biostatistics. This is all very broad picture, but basically, the large group of researchers who are always open to international collaboration and synergy, and we have available funding options for student exchanges and early career research programs. Thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fuertes. As we move into pollen season here in Ithaca, New York, we feel very connected to your research, and I'm sure everyone relates, in terms of the importance of this topic. Next, we'll move to Dr. Kripong Pirul at Chulalongkorn University in Thailand.
Hello, thank you so much for having me here. So I'm from Chulalongkorn University in Thailand. I'm one of the developing, but some people call it transitional countries. So we are setting up our new School of Global Health in Thailand. So basically, we have a very close connection with the national bodies in Thailand, both in public and private sector. And my work have involved in a broad variety of fields. And we actually published the first case of the COVID infection outside China. And before this, we published a case on the SARS and the MERS and how our health system can manage those cases. So with my background as a medical doctor, I have involved in those clinical aspects of the human health, which is part of the One Health. And in addition to that, I try to apply the health system perspective into how we manage those things. Okay, so I think the brief bio can tell about the list of things that we have done, including we actually develop our own test kits that can be used locally. We also developed the COVID vaccines in Thailand ourselves. At least 3 versions of the COVID vaccine are in the phase 3 right now. And we are trying to integrate any other aspect of the environmental health, including right now is a wastewater assessment. So we try to assess the association between the pathogens and the good germs. So we usually talk about the probiotics. Now we try to integrate the concept of the germs. So the germ themselves didn't know whether they look at them as a pathogen or as a friend, right? But let's see if we can see the association. So right now we are conducting the wastewater assessment to see whether the COVID virus and the bacteria and the fungus and all kinds of germs at different sizes may correlate, and we may be able to use that as part of the prediction model or something like that. And we also apply some kind of big data, as Dr. YY mentioned earlier. I'm very happy to join the Singapore team to work on these issues. We apply the national data set because we are pro-public country. So we have a lot of centralized information system that can be useful for the research and academic purposes. And right now we are doing the probiotics platform, which is AI based. And this one is kind of very good for the promoting the good germs per se. And there are so many other aspects at the broader level. And in terms of health system, in terms of the role of the people in the community who are not healthcare sector. For example, the village health volunteer, some country call them community health worker. So how they involve in the management efforts to prevent and protect the One Health. So I think that I will stop at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crete. That's wonderful. Many, many connections. Next, we'll go to Dr. Sarah Mehta at Cornell University. Saurabh, we can't hear you yet. We can't hear you, but we're going to come back to you. Is that all right? Okay, great. We'll come back to you, and we're going to skip ahead. Apologies to Dr. Renu Singh. We'll skip ahead to you. I think Ernest is also logging in with some audio trouble, but we're going to skip ahead to Dr. Renu Singh from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Thank you, Dr. Singh.
Hi, thank you for having me, and it's been so wonderful to hear from all of you, and I look forward to hearing from everyone else. It's just, I myself come from a kind of interdisciplinary background, starting as a microbiologist, now being a professor of public policy. So it's really lovely to have so many people all together on something that we really share in common, and to just have each other to learn from. I am at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology in the Division of Public Policy. And my work focuses a lot more on the politics and policy of public health, with my training now being more in the political science field as well. And I'm very interested in the role of public opinion and polarization and institutions in policy change in regard to public health and sustainability. So I run a lot of surveys and survey experiments, and very interested in a range of different countries, and polarization, you know, of course, and populism has been on the rise, unfortunately, kind of almost everywhere. And then in terms of institutions, I'm very interested in everything from norms to science expertise, so a kind of range of institutions. And I work on non-communicable diseases, so the book project is on looking at factors that drive contemporary and historical policy change in obesity policy in Germany and the States. But I also look at infectious disease, specifically HIV. Kind of universally, we have an HIV policy lab at the O'Neill Institute at Georgetown that I'm affiliated with, and we have a data set that basically includes all countries, 33 indicators. And then also, of course, you know, as we were saying earlier, it's a very timely time to have this discussion because of COVID-19, and a lot of my research has been also looking at public health measure compliance across the Asia Pacific, which is now my home base, but also the US and Europe, which is what I focused on previously. And, you know, I'm very interested in how public opinion really towards these policies is shaped and shapes what we can do in the future. So how, for example, donor identity affects support for foreign aid funded public health programs in Egypt, or how priming Germans or Italians or Americans on the COVID-19 pandemic potentially could influence support for other public health policies beyond just COVID-19, as we all have so many interests and concerns beyond just the current pandemic, which of course is very central. And, you know, maybe kind of moving beyond just what I work on with colleagues, we have a division of environmental and sustainable kind of sciences division, and we've been working a lot on the role that COVID has had in sustainable fashion consumption. So we have a group that does that at UST, but also we're working with an international group, the International Research Network on Sustainable Fashion and Consumption. And we have a real hub in Hong Kong of many universities that have expertise in this area. And maybe just a final point as we look forward as to what to look on. The one thing that really kept coming to my mind that I wanted to mention is that all of the concerns that I think we share and that maybe we don't even share, I think really cut across this concern of inequality and poverty. So vaccine inequality with COVID-19, of course, but you know, whether you're looking at environmental concerns or food security or public health concerns, that was something I thought I'd just kind of mention as something that I would love to also hear from everyone else about, is that's something that I think has been on the top of my mind for a long time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. One of our colleagues here who focuses on Singapore and Southeast Asian politics has just published a book on pandemic politics, a political scientist, Tom Popinski. So I'll put that in the chat as well as another point of connection across region and topic area.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll go back to Dr. Sarah Mehta.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? All right. Zoom decided to freeze on me at the right moment. Let's see if I can share my slides. Can you see my slides?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. All right. So thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this panel, and I just will share a few highlights of some of our work and opportunities. This is the outline. My disclosure, the key thing to notice that I'm on the board of directors for a startup company that's commercializing some aspects of technology developed in my lab. I flipped the order of the ask that instead of going straight into my research, I thought that I will at least show a couple of graphics that I like about One Health, where these are two from University of Alaska and from Wageningen University in Netherlands. I can never get that name right. I've given up hope, so apologies. And but these capture basically that how many disciplines need to be involved for us to make a meaningful difference in global health, in One Health. And I know the terminology keeps changing, but the ultimate goal is to improve the health across the board of humans, animals, the planet, and so on and so forth. But you can see it's everyone from life sciences, natural sciences, humanities, social sciences, everyone needs to get together. And I think the expertise at Cornell and across its global partners is a unique opportunity for us to be able to come together and make a difference here. We try to do this on a smaller scale in my own team. So I'll just switch and maybe talk a little bit about my own work. And I lead labs in India and Ecuador, and also partner with other collaborators, other scientists in East Africa particularly, and also in other some of the other settings. This map is a little older now, as is a photograph pre-pandemic. And we have a transdisciplinary approach to global health challenges. We strongly believe in this kind of an approach where we bring together, we have expertise within the team, and then we also we bring in the right partners for both on the research academic side as well as the public health or the population implementation side. And the work that this leads to are things like, inventing field-friendly devices such as a Cornell Nutriphone and Fever Phone to enable community-level or point-of-need diagnosis. We have large active surveillance programs both in India and Ecuador that help us keep our hand on the pulse of what's going on in these communities, what kind of challenges they're facing, so that we can develop solutions. We also do randomized trials with sustainable agriculture-based interventions, particularly to improve maternal and child health. And this kind of approach is also increasingly reflected in the approach of funders, where, for example, NIH just awarded $170 million for precision nutrition, which is bringing together multiple disciplines, microbiome, metabolomics, artificial intelligence, nutrition, and so on and so forth, to understand what the next steps in this should look like. We are, of course, right in the middle of it. We are leading the research coordinating center for this. And I'll stop there. My contact information is up there on the website. So if anyone is interested, please reach out.
Thank you so much, Saurabh. That's really fantastic, and congratulations on the NIH really important and wide-reaching work. Next, we'll move to Dr. Kun Yin at Shanghai Jiao Tong University.
Hello.
We can hear you. Yes, thank you.
I will share the screen. Can you see my slide?
Yes. We can't exactly see your face. There we are. Thank you. Very good.
Okay, sure. Actually, this introduction is prepared by our vice dean, the Dr. Xiao, but he's busy with some other stuff because Shanghai actually is locked down because of COVID-19 pandemic, and he's a little bit uncomfortable. So I will come here to do the introduction. And firstly, I will briefly introduce myself. I am the professor and the faculty member at the Shanghai Jiao Tong University School of Medicine, and my research interest focused on the optical biosensor development and some other possible diagnostic platforms. And my research focused on the detection of the infectious pathogens and the environmental pollution, because they are very harmful to the human beings, the animals, the plants, and as well as the ecosystem. But the traditional detection methods are usually limited in the centralized lab, and which with the complicated procedure and perhaps will induce the detection delay, which is a challenge to the prevention network of the infectious diseases and such as AMR, especially under the One Health, under the One Health concept. So I try to develop some novel biosensor technologies and the portable diagnosis platform to address this challenge. And about it, my introduction, and now I will try to introduce our research center. Actually, the School of Global Health and in the Shanghai Jiao Tong University School of Medicine and the One Health Center in the Shanghai Jiao Tong University, we worked as the one group, and we focused on to create a one health research platform and develop a one health disciplinary, and we focus on the research of the human, animal, and the environmental health, and the one health concept, and some as well as the one health governance and the one health big data research. And one moment. And our center is used to design a set of excellent and the integration of the partners, and to work as a think tank, some research innovations, the education, and the knowledge hub, and the One Health concept. And we have several departments, such as including the infectious diseases and the tropical disease, animal health and health security, environmental health and eco-safety, and environmental governance. And we try to explore the multidisciplinary collaborative management model. And we also collaborate with some other schools in at the School of the medicine at the Shanghai Jiao Tong University, and such as the School of Public Health, School of Basic Medicine, and the School of the Agriculture and Biology at the Shanghai Jiao Tong University. And we also have the collaboration with the School of Medicine at the University of Edinburgh. And we also have some collaboration with some with the CMB and some international organizations such as the WHO, FAO, and OIE. And we also do some modeling approach to achieve the to establish the effective governance systems. And we try to do the firstly we will do the research at the Chongming Island as a pilot study, and we test the effectiveness of the One Health approach. And we already collect some animal, the wastewater, the air, and as well as some human being clinical samples on the Chongming Island. And further, we will scale up to the Hainan Island, which is the second largest island in China, and to test the efficiency of the One Health concept. And then we will try to scaling up further to the global level to share the our experience, the Chinese license in multi-site of the world, and to promote the One Health research. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really interesting. And also the connections with Edinburgh is a good example of the kind of multinational relationships and partnerships here. I see that Dr. Ernest Kenu has been able to join. Dr. Kenu from the University of Ghana, are you able to hear us? I think the connection there might be a little bit choppy. I see it coming in and out. So we'll move next to Dr. Rebecca Nelson from Cornell University.
Thanks so much, Rachel and Wendy, and great to be here with you all. So I'm associated here at Cornell with the School of Integrative Plant Science and also the Department of Global Development. So over the last couple of decades, I've been mostly focusing on the genetics of disease resistance in plants in my research program, but I've recently made a pivot towards the topic of the circular bionutrient economy. So just to kind of get there a little bit here the next couple minutes. But so the One Health framework has been really essential in informing my work here. I first learned about it, of course, from the veterinary perspective, from friends in that world, noting the connections among the healths of people and animals and wildlife. So maybe I'm using sort of a pirated version. I see other people presenting this expanded version. So my triangle, my key core triangle would be soil health, plant health, and human health, with planetary health as a driver for those relationships. So soil health is at the root of agricultural production, of course, and we have various different kinds of soil health crises going around the world. And soil health then is an important determinant of plant health. And as a plant pathologist, over the years, I made a sort of an evolution from various foliar fungal diseases to fungal diseases that result in the food systems having a lot of fungal toxins as contaminants. And these mycotoxins, most famous of which is aflatoxin, are very much exacerbated when you have the plants under stress. Of course, as you have planetary health problems, you have different soil conditions that lead to significantly more plant stress, less water holding capacity, less nutrients there for the plants. And so you get these vast accumulations of hundreds of fungal toxins in the food systems of Africa, Asia, and this continent in North America as well. So I started seeing mycotoxins not only as a problem to be solved, but also as a symptom of a larger set of problems. So hence the pivot towards a circular bionutrient economy idea. So then sort of stepping back and seeing these problems in the larger context, we have soil health crisis, fertilizer crisis, very acute right now, doubling, trebling, quadrupling of fertilizer prices just in the last few weeks, sanitation crisis, water quality crisis, food security crisis, climate change crisis. All of these crises are in one degree or another connected with the fact that we're running the planet on this in this era of waste where we make everything with petrochemicals and then we dump it into the environment. So we've gotten this, I've gotten very fascinated with the idea of circular economy as a way forward to addressing some of these challenges. In particular, the circular bionutrient economy, a subset of circular economy ideas, uses the idea of turning waste into resources. So in particular, organic underutilized resources, OUR, our stuff. You know, how can we use our stuff, be it sanitation products or others, to soil amendments and animal feed and so on. So there's different approaches that are suited to different scales and contexts. And I'm particularly interested in, you know, urban food production using our stuff as inputs. So I can hear from other people that people are working on remote sensing to identify where these problems occur, all sorts of local sensing as to do surveillance for various biomarkers and various pollutants and contaminants, and mycotoxins, I hope, could be added to the list of things that we can do collectively, do surveillance on, particularly to support low-income communities to identify and address challenges. I love, you know, the work that Dr. Fortes mentioned about associating drivers through big data approaches and also collectively working to better teach and implement circular economy and circular bionutrient economy. So yeah, thanks so much. Really wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson. That's fantastic. And I love the way in which you're already identifying the connections here. Fantastic. Next, we'll move to Dr. Jing Huang from Peking University. Oh, we can't hear you yet.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
It's good to see you, everyone. And I'm the assistant professor in the Department of Occupational and Environmental Health Science, School of Public Health in Peking University. And my research mainly focuses on the building environment and population health and health impact of air pollution and the intervention evaluation. And in recent years, we have do the investigation on what's the benefits of the China air pollution control, the health impact on the population, and we have evaluated the health benefits of the China's air pollution prevention and control action plan, use the big data, and we have conducted several studies in the indoor environment. That is what about use the air purification in the indoor environment, what's the health benefits in the children, in the adults. And in recent years, Peking University, we have the Environmental and the Health Medical Center, and also the Global Environmental Investigating Center. And as well as we have several cohort studies, such as the Chinese cohort study in the elderly population. And in recent years, we started to focus on the building environment and its impact on the human health. And the research mainly help us to understand how the multiple environment factors influence health. And we will use advanced analytical methods that will capture the complex relationship between the environment and health. And we realized that it is very important for us to cooperate in the environmental epidemiology, as well as the clinical medicine and machine learning, and also as the geospecific information science. And I hope to cooperate with this expert in this field and to better do the environmental health research. And maybe this will be important to provide the evidence useful for developing relevant policies or interventions to improve our building environment and the promotion of better health for the population. And I think it's a very good opportunity to communicate here with all the professors here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Huang. That's fantastic and really so interesting in terms of thinking about these connections between the air quality and purification plans as well. Next, we will move to Dr. Deepika Jan from OP Jindal Global University.
Thank you, Rachel. Hello, everyone. My name is Deepika Jain. I'm a professor of law, Vice Dean Research, and Director for Center for Justice, Law and Society at Jindal Global Law School. And it's my pleasure to be speaking to you about the research that we do at the center and at the university. So we're a group of scholars and activists that engage with high quality research, both theoretical and empirical, but we also combine it with activism and advocacy. We started in 2009, and since then our focus has been on health law policy research and scholarship. Besides doing research, and we also engage in policy interventions and legislative interventions. So our research informs the policy interventions that we engage in, and I'll give you an example of how we do that. So this is one research that I would like to sort of speak about. This is basically a research on a group of women in India called Asha workers, who are community healthcare workers, and they're basically the bridge between community and public healthcare system. The thing about this group of women is that it's an all-women workforce within the healthcare system, and they're not paid salaries. So basically, it's a very gendered sort of an inequitable healthcare system where women are not paid, but also we're working within a political economy framework to look at how the neoliberalization has shifted the healthcare from public sort of space to private space and has impacted the budgeting and financing. So that's one of the areas that we're engaging in. And simultaneously, we're working with the Asha workers that we happen to interview during the research on launching a campaign, an online campaign, where we are highlighting certain violations, including the right to health violations. So this is simultaneous sort of work that we're engaging in. We also respond to research in terms of policy engagements. So for SRHR, which is again one of our core focus, we basically also, India had introduced a legal reform bill during the pandemic on abortion law reforms, and they had a provision which basically mandates a third-party authorization through setting up of medical boards. We basically conducted a research called the Medical Board for Access to Abortion Untenable, where we used the government data to show that how there is lack of 80% gynecologists and pediatricians in certain areas in India, and setting up such a board would not be feasible. And we were cited in the parliament during the parliamentary debate on this issue. So we also do research to respond to a policy. Besides that, we also engage in legislative and other policy interventions. So for example, recently we advised the government on the model health bill, but we've also in the past engaged with multiple bills that have come out. We've sort of responded on and led the community response through community engagement on the bill. I'll just sort of focus a little bit on our future research. We have a few projects planned in collaborations with certain organizations in India, including grassroots organizations. So the first project we're focusing on is regulation of pandemic through criminal law. So what we've seen in our comparative studies is that criminal law was one of the most important sort of legal framework that was used to sort of contain pandemic, and not so much health law. And India is one of the case studies in that. We were also looking at, when we were advising the government on health law, we did a very detailed study on health law regulations, and we found out that there were almost 700 legislations in the country on health law. So we're reviewing those legislations right now to see what the post-colonial and colonial regulations of health law look like in India. Finally, we're also looking at decriminalization of healthcare in Asia, and we have a project that we're working on, a funded project that we're working on, where we are looking at 10 Asian countries to see how abortion is regulated within a carceral framework. We also are focusing on health rights of transgender persons and gender non-conforming persons in India. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about the regulation of pandemic in Global South. So we've looked at what kind of measures were taken during the pandemic by countries in the Global South to sort of contain the pandemic, but also to sort of provide some kind of welfare schemes in terms of accessibility to public healthcare system. I'm just going to stop here, and I hope to have a fruitful collaborative conversation with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jain. And really the connection between, as many of you mentioned, the policy angle, legal aspects, through to the medical necessities in terms of provision of medical care, but also the surveillance and data needed to understand what's happening. It's really fantastic. So finally, we'll move to Dr. Alexander Travis from Cornell University.
Thank you. And I'd like to very briefly introduce 4 different programs we have in One Health. The first is our Master of Public Health program, which we began because we've recognized that many of the most pressing health challenges people face come from 2 things: the unsustainable ways we interact with the environment and the inequitable ways we interact with each other. So our focal areas of concentration include food systems and health, which ranges all the way from production to consumption, as well as infectious disease epidemiology. We're expanding in areas like climate change, biodiversity, disaster preparedness and response. The second is the new Cornell Center for Pandemic Prevention and Response. This stretches across Cornell's multiple campuses, including Weill Cornell Medicine, and has really, an umbrella role organizing a very large number of faculty in 5 areas: prevention, prediction, protection, preparedness, and response. So marrying both, say, biophysical laboratory science with the practice of public health, human health, and veterinary medicine, but also heavily involving social sciences, communication, policy, and things like that. One of our best known One Health programs is Cornell's Wildlife Health Center, which again ties together numerous faculty in looking at issues of biodiversity conservation, but looking at that One Health interface in particular, whether it's invasive species, disease surveillance, policies affecting agriculture that influence transfrontier conservation areas, for example. And then lastly, to do some of these things, we've created a new academic structure, the Department of Public and Ecosystem Health, which again ties together people from across multiple disciplines in one department around 3 challenges instead of, again, an academic discipline approach. So achieving healthy food systems, tackling emerging health threats like antimicrobial resistance, climate change, emerging infectious disease, and conserving biodiversity. And if we look at something like pathogen spillover from SARS-CoV-2, clearly each of these challenges are intimately related to each other. And in my own laboratory, I work on reproductive biology, assisted reproductive technologies that stretch from breeding endangered species to helping people who are plagued by fertility issues, to the development of point-of-care diagnostics that we can use in broad settings for vulnerable populations in public health. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Travis. It really connects so many pieces, and particularly we bring in the opportunities for student engagement and learning, which is something that I want to also return to in our conversation now as we open the field for dialogue across all of these points of intersection. One Health is a concept premised on the intersection of all of these fields, and I think it's so well represented today by our panelists. And so one question that I wanted to pose to the panelists today, to our experts gathered, and I encourage all of our audience members to put your questions in the Q&A function so we can take them up. But the first question is really, now that you've heard each other's introductions, what points of collaboration do you see as potential opportunities, and particularly, how we might reduce barriers to engage across these disciplines that we might not see as kind of traditionally connected, but I think your comments here this afternoon have pointed out how very necessary they all are. So that's the first question that I'd like to pose to you. You can just raise your hands if you'd like to respond to that. And a related question is how, if we're thinking about this current pandemic crisis, pandemics that may await us in the future, how can we use these collaborative potentials to address humanity and the environment? Where does the potential lie in your views? How can we use data science? How might we be able to use law, public policy interventions, surveillance, understanding of all of the environmental factors that you've mentioned? So anyone who'd like to respond to that in terms of potential? Yes, Dr. Fuertes.
Unmuted myself. I'll touch upon the first comment that you made, so where we can see sort of potential interactions. One of the things that struck me today, and where I'd like to sort of talk more with people, is how I can link my research, which is really looking at association, using statistical techniques and big data to identify what probably is going on, and how we can translate that into then policy change. I feel that we do like a lot of work, and just looking at air pollution is one example. We have hundreds of air pollution studies, which are obviously important, but it's taken a huge body of evidence to translate that into, for example, a lowering of the WHO guidelines last fall. And so I'd be very interested in working with people who are more on the policy side of things and working with sort of changes that reflect society, and asking them, what is it that you need from me? What sort of studies should I be doing, should I be focusing on to sort of inform the policy changes that they're driving?
That's a fantastic question. And one of the programs that we've just begun here, and we will be inviting all of our Global Hub partners to join in of next year, is a Global Public Voices program, which gives a set of training to scholars like yourself in terms of, working with what types of data, what types of studies do you need to inform these specific policy interventions and possibilities? Dr. Singh.
Yeah, so I guess very much in parallel, and in a way, I guess what I was thinking when you asked the first question, I think is related to the second a bit as well. And I think a shared interest that we all have, in what we overlap and in also what we don't, is how do we keep the momentum going? And as a political scientist, this is what I often think about, because my passion first started with, an issue that doesn't have as much salience still, but has a huge impact. So obesity policy is kind of where I decided to really work on for my first book. And I think that's something that, of course, now it's funny because the second was meant to be a historical analysis of infectious disease, and now that doesn't seem low salience, right? Now it is salient, but it's not always, and it doesn't remain, right? We've gone through waves of having Zika, Ebola. Of course, this is the one with the largest scale, but I think something we can all share with COVID-19, but also kind of beyond COVID-19, is how do we keep these issues engaged with the public? How do we keep that engaged with policymakers, and how does something happen beyond just keeping them engaged? And that, to me, is the biggest concern I have, but I think it's something that matters the most to all of us, right? Again, this is, as you were saying, Elaine, this is, we do a lot of research, we do a lot of studies, but we need that to have an impact. And how do we get that impact? And I think a lot of, that's why I kind of became even more so interested in public opinion, is because I think people and what they think matters, and how things are framed to them by policymakers who want to make change, or advocates who want to make change, but also how they feel and how they may or may not push for that change themselves matters. And so that's kind of where I try to find answers. But I would also love to hear about, everyone else's experiences with that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Dr. Nelson.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm sort of trying to contribute to this build that I'm hearing. Dr. Fuerte started out with sort of this prediction to policy connection, and then we just heard this public opinion part. And I want to put that ground truthing back on the table. I think we have collectively a lot of power in surveillance and monitoring of different things, but do we have a coherent way of lowering the bar so more people could do more coherent surveillance together, and who controls that? And there's a lot of sensitivity around people monitoring their biomarkers or whatever. How do we make people feel like, to the public opinion thing, that I want to know if I'm being poisoned, and I can have something to say about understanding that. How do we make that something that people can buy into, in part by actually democratizing it in some way? How does that work? I just want to put on the table the idea that container-based sanitation seems to me an idea that unlocks a lot of answers to a lot of the crises that I mentioned: the sanitation crisis, the water health crisis, the food security crisis. So if we could, use container-based, use the power and potential of public health surveillance to help advance the cause of container-based sanitation, it seems to me there's win-wins there. But again, it's very intimate stuff for very many people. To achieve that, how do you get people on board for making those sorts of changes? Over. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. Exactly. Those are the questions, right? The potential of surveillance and contributing one's own information to these huge data systems, and the questions that surround that in terms of sensitivity and to what end that data is put. Dr. Crete.
Hi, I just would like to give my 2 cents. So in terms of collaborations, I see 4 themes. One is the data, the second is microbes, the third is the food, and the fourth is the policy. So so those are the 4 themes that I think we can collaborate based on what we have heard today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crete. Dr. Travis.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Just to go back to your original question and then tie in again some of these comments. I think an effort like this is really helpful, hopefully in getting, if we can get some projects, collaborations between partners off the ground, because then when something happens, we have those relationships built up and we can respond to them effectively as a team, a global team. And so it is really important that we follow up with some pursuit of low-hanging fruit and collaborations among the individuals, on the screen and their peers. That'll position us, I think, collectively very well to have impact, right? And alongside this, I agree 100%, those can't just be in social science research or biomedical research. If we can involve the policy dimensions at the same time, then we'll be sure that we're asking right questions that will inform policy. So I see all those things as we can't separate them anymore. We have to break down the traditional academic structures and look at things differently.
Absolutely right. And that really goes back to Elaine's questions about, how can I make sure that my data and study and research design is being shaped at the outset to answer questions that are being asked to then inform how those policies are being put in place. Dr. Mehta.
Thank you. Just a quick, adding some personal experiences there. It's obviously not a one-size-fits-all. It's not something that's going to work for everyone. But just putting together some of the questions that have come up, what has worked for us, for example, in some of the contexts, and it's not 100% successful, is that whenever we start a study, for example, on the surveillance side, or if you're doing a randomized trial, particularly with things like food, or things that we are thinking will affect the programming or the policy stage, or things that we are, trying to figure out, okay, we are putting together a meal package that we want to be incorporated into the India's integrated childhood development scheme, for example. What helps us is to get those stakeholders, like what Dr. Jan already mentioned, right? So she talked about the ASHA workers, Anganwadi workers, and so on in India. So getting people on board, getting people who are going to make those decisions on board before we start, that has always helped because that gets buy-in from them. So when we go back to them with the results, or when they're engaged even through the process of the study, and we go back to them with the results, see this worked, and this is something locally produced evidence with the right partners, And so that has a lot more receptiveness, so to speak, in the right circles in terms of affecting policy, affecting change. And it's the same thing with, we do a lot of work with World Health Organization, with PAHO and so on. It's the same thing, same principles kind of hold us instead, like getting them to the table at the design stage, not necessarily downstream. So if that has worked in some cases, not, again, it's not 100% kind of a thing for us.
Yeah, fantastic. Really important points about the stakeholders, the necessity of collaboration, and thinking about, I think that also speaks to Rebecca's point about building trust as well, in terms of how you're setting up the research and which communities you're working with as well, as a set of stakeholders as well. Fantastic. Any other thoughts on that from our panelists before I move to the next question? So I have another question here that was submitted from the audience that I think this panel is especially well placed to address is, how to handle zoonotic diseases with the One Health approach. A big question from the University of Zambia, and thinking about this particular moment as well. How would you frame the contributions of the One Health approach as we think about this question? Yes, Alex.
Yeah, so as a veterinarian and being at our College of Veterinary Medicine, we have a very large wildlife health program that does a lot of disease surveillance work. We have a large animal health diagnostic center that does over 1 million tests a year, samples globally. These are critically important things. And it used to be, maybe 10, 15 years ago, why would you want to study disease X in wildlife or see what's out there? Well, SARS-CoV-2 tells us, very strongly why that is so important. But what is essential in the One Health paradigm that we don't lose is that we don't look at wildlife as just bad things that are reservoirs for disease. It's how we interact with the environment. So oftentimes wildlife species and ecosystems are protecting us from disease. And when we go and start to take pieces of them out, or interact with them inappropriately, that's when we increase our risk for disease emergence. So one of the key principles there is really trying to value the ecosystem services that are protective. And that's a challenge because oftentimes you don't know what they are until they go missing. But I think that's a really important point. So it's not just surveillance, but also then understanding the protective mechanisms and valuing them appropriately so we save them and preserve them.
I think that's such an important point. Thank you for raising it, and the expertise to understand how those systems are so interlinked that one particular piece that's missing could create a big problem. Dr. Kanyin.
Firstly, I want to say that I totally agree with what Alex said about how to handle the zoonosis problem. I think firstly the novel detection, the diagnosis methods, and technology may be very important because for the zoonosis, such as the emerging zoonosis, this infectious diseases, maybe it's not that easy to collect the samples from the wild animals. So perhaps the novel diagnosis method is very important. And secondly, I think the samples, how to collect these samples, not only from the human beings, but also from the animals, from the environmental sample, I think is also very important. And then I think we will go to use the data analysis, such as use the AI and the deep learning, machine learning, or some others, try to collect this data and to establish effective the surveillance system. Maybe it's also very important. And then we will go to to establish a very effective policy system. I think it's also very meaningful to handle this zoonosis problem. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Absolutely, right. The potential to collect, and I think that maps onto some of the discussion we were hearing from Elaine as well, in terms of big data and understanding pollutants or pollens and the interaction with all kinds of environmental systems. Dr. Truba.
Yes, I just would like to add that the use of metagenomics that in the past used to be something that was able to do in only the developed countries, industrialized nations, now is very easy to work in small countries using, for instance, this mini ion. And you know, I think the metagenomics has a very interesting advantage because the problems of emerging diseases, emerging zoonotic diseases, is so complex that we need to have something that some tool that allow you to do this type of massive sampling of what's going on in the environment.
Absolutely. And you know, that again, the connection between really harnessing all of our scientific tools and analyses to understanding the human and the environmental element. It's what makes the One Health approach so necessary and so exciting, and also really so collaborative at heart. With that, I want to thank all of our expert panelists. This has really been a truly wonderful conversation, and to be able to understand the possibilities for further connections here. We'll reach back out to all of our panelists and audience members who are interested in terms of continuing this conversation in the next round and through our Slack channel. So we look forward to being in contact, and thank you all so much for sharing your expertise with us today.